Next. Oh, I have to use a clicker, sorry. Yeah. जन्माद्यस्य यतोऽन्वयादितरतः चार्थेष्वभिज्ञस्वराट् तेने ब्रह्महृदाय आदिकवये मुह्यन्ति यत्सूरयः तेजो वारिमृदां यथा विनिमयो यत्र त्रिसर्गो मृषा धाम्ना स्वेन सदा निरस्तकुहकं सत्यं परं धीमहि. Let us read a translation. I need to click, I forget that, sorry. That from whom creation, sustenance, and dissolution of the universe takes place, who is both the instrumental and material cause of it, who is omniscient, is the only one having self-mastery, being the one independent entity, who illumined the mind of Brahma with the Vedic revelation, whose wisdom is the wonder of even the greatest sages, in whom the world of the three gunas subsists just as the combination of materials like fire, water, and earth subsist in their causes without changing their elemental nature, in whose consciousness there is nothing false. On that truth supreme we meditate. Good evening, friends. So, the topic of today's discussion is story of Dhruva. Many of us, thank you. Removed my nervousness a bit, I guess. Thank you. Many of us have heard some stories from Bhagavatam from childhood, at least those who grew up in India to some extent. So same case with me too. But it never occurred to me that actually those stories that we heard independently were part of a bigger text called Bhagavatam. So the first exposure I got to Bhagavatam as a text was actually in Providence here, Vedanta Society. I mean, I heard the text name, of course, in India, but never really bothered to pick a book and read. In mid-2000s, I think, somewhere around 2005, Joan, Rishali, myself, and there was those who were there at that time, we used to read together this book every day, half an hour after meditation in the evenings. That was a very good experience I had. I perfectly got benefited by it, I would say that. And later on, of course, that morphed into the reading group every week we have now, I think, on Saturday evenings. That time we used to read this book, Swami Tapasyanji's translation, published by Sri Ramakrishna Math, Chennai. I'm just showing you the book, but anyway, this is the book. This is an older version, I guess. This is a newer edition too. So it was well written by Swamiji, of course. I mean, I can't judge his, obviously I'm not a scholar to judge, but I think what I heard and what I gained as a information and knowledge from it, and what hit me hard in my life too, I was definitely very grateful to that Swamiji for this monumental translation. So I'll follow that book heavily in this talk too. I'll give a lot of excerpts from whatever the translation is. So we'll follow that books. So one way of making a story very gripping is, that's my personal opinion, of course, is to have some sense of narration, like someone narrating an incident, what they have experienced or what they have seen. It makes it a little bit more interesting than just a third person writing something about something else. So Bhagavatam, of course, totally takes that mode. You can, as Swamiji said earlier, there are different levels of narration. The first one, of course, Vyasa, the sage, who has written the Bhagavatam, passes it to his son, sage Sukha, which, of course, is not doesn't form a part of the narration of this book, but that's kind of the starting point. The main narration is actually the Shukadeva passing it to King Parikshit. We haven't come across those stories or the context yet. We'll come probably later on when Swamiji takes the classes later on. For now, I would say that's a high level of narration. And there in that narration, Suta Romaharshana, there's another person called Suta, he listened to that, and later on, he passed this Bhagavatam knowledge to sage Shaunaka. So those are the two levels of narration. Actually, I have a slide for that. So Shuka narrates to Parikshit, which is what he was waiting to die. We'll describe a little bit more of details later on. And then Suta Romaharshana passes it to sage Shaunaka, which is point number 3. he heard it in the assembly when Shukadeva was narrating that to Parikshit. And later on in this narration of Shuka to Parikshit, actually there was a conversation that happens between Maitreya and Vidura. Maitreya is a sage Maitreya and Vidura. This conversation actually contains the story of Dhruva. So basically, you can understand that Shuka and Parikshit were talking to each other, and Shuka describes that Maitreya and Vidura had a conversation, and that's basically is being told that that context will come. But also we have another level of narration, which is Suta retelling it later. So we kind of get a blend of both of these, the higher level of narration and the retelling of the Bhagavatam by Suta. So we get a mix of both. But the main context would be actually the Maitreya and Vidura conversation, which forms like a subtext part of these two narrations. So going on with the Parikshit case, Parikshit was cursed by a Brahmana boy for some things he had done which were not appropriate. I will not go into the details because that will take a lot of time by itself. So he's waiting to die. He was being cursed by the Brahmana boy that he'll die in 7 days. Now, what would normal person do in 7 days? Of course, everyone has their opinion, whatever they would like to do in 7 days if they know that they're dying. But Parikshit, being a devotee, he thought he should listen to Lord's excellences and spend some time in the holy company. So again, if you are a very sincere devotee, a sage, great sage, like Shukadeva himself will come and probably prepare you for the death, which is what the Parikshit's case was. So he began to listen to the Lord's excellences narrated by Shukadeva while preparing for, of course, his final departure in 7 days. So as I mentioned again, the narration, of course, there Suta listened to that narration and then he was passing it to sage Shaunaka, and in between that, what Suta describes was the conversation that happened between Maitreya and Vidura. Now Vidura himself is actually a son of Vyasa, at least going a bit fast. Vidura himself was a son of Vyasa. In Mahabharata he comes as a prominent character, and he couldn't bring himself to see the war that happens at the end of the Mahabharata between the two cousins, Kauravas and Pandavas. So he goes on a pilgrimage. Now in that pilgrimage, he meets sage Maitreya, and there he actually kind of discusses this. Sage Maitreya actually advises him about a lot of other things like creation, and there's a Kapilopadesha also comes, I think, in that context, if I'm right. Anyway, but there's a significant portion of Bhagavatam is a conversation between Maitreya and sage Vidura. And they form the Skanda, which is like cantos 3 and 4 in Bhagavatam. And this story of Dhruva comes in canto 4, chapters 8 to 12. So Suta, I will read something. Suta narrates, basically in conversation with Dhruva, Maitreya begins to describe the lineage of Swayambhuva Manu. He is like one of the early beings that was created by God, if you can say. Actually, Swayambhuva stands for self-created in a way, but of course, he forms part of the creation. And he was pious himself, and he had 2 sons, Priyavrata and Uttanapada. I didn't describe that family here, but Uttanapada becomes the king. And eventually he has 2 wives. The names are Suniti and Suruchi. What you see in the slide there, basically they are like the relationships that are with respect to Dhruva. So Dhruva's mother was Suniti, and Uttama was a brother, but he was the son of Suruchi. So he had 2 wives and 2 children. The names have some kind of significance too. Suruchi generally means like Ruchi is more of a happiness oriented, so good happiness or pleasure, if you want to put that way. And Suniti is more of a good conduct or morals and so on. So more of a kind of providing a base to a character. So again, it's a very kind of a symbolic way you can say that Uttanapada was more attracted to the pleasure seeking, rather, was more of a pleasure seeking person than actually a good character or a knowledge seeking. This is of course going beyond what the text says. This is just a kind of a my take, if you want to put that way. Again, I guess we hear that in Kathopanishad too, something similar. The good and the pleasant come to a man, and the thoughtful mind turns around them and distinguishes. The wise choose out the good from the pleasant, but the dull soul chooses the pleasant rather than the getting of his good and its having. Of course, this is in the context of getting knowledge, spiritual knowledge, turning away from materialistic things and turning our attention more inward and towards God or self, whichever path you want to take. So each of these wives had a son, as I described, Uttama and Dhruva, by Suruchi and Suniti respectively. It is mentioned that Dhruva was about only 5 or 6 years of age. So he was a very young kid, almost like a toddler if you want to put that way, or infant. And then in that age, of course, you can understand like any child, he was seeking father's attention and love. So one day what he saw was Uttama, his brother, was sitting on father's lap, the king's lap. And they were playful and having a good time in some sort of. And Dhruva also wanted to, of course, sit on the lap of his father, so he approaches him. And at that moment, his stepmom, Suruchi, she bursts out with that kind of, that's the dialogue she says. I mean, that's of course a translation from Swami Tapasyaranji's book. Boy, you don't deserve to be seated on the king's lap, for though you are the king's son, you are not born of me. You sought this privilege of sitting on his lap, but being of another woman, it is improper for you to think so. And it is also impossible to fulfill your desire. If you aspire to sit on the king's lap, you have got to worship the Lord and by his grace be born in my womb. So, first thing you can imagine, a 5-year-old being told such kind of words. So, it's pretty shocking, hurtful and all that. And second thing, she is being a little bit, I would say, to my, a bit of a surprise maybe, but maybe that's the thing about Bhagavatam in general. Everyone has some kind of a devotional bent of mind. She didn't say like, you should be born in my womb or something. She actually put nicely the context saying, you should worship Lord, obtain his grace, and only then you can be born in my womb. So in a way, you can say she's very haughty, of course, arrogant and all that, but also she has this perspective that God's grace is the ultimate thing that one has to achieve. So even in that arrogant mood or whatever you want to say, she's still putting that devotional attitude to some extent, which is, I would say, somewhat admirable. So at this moment, we can imagine what kind of emotions that Dhruva must be undergoing. He probably felt very hurtful and sad that his father did not speak a word, did not even protest or anything. But at the same time, he was very angry at his stepmom for the words. And Bhagavatam actually uses these words. It says, he took long breaths like a hissing snake hit by a stick. Yeah, Bhagavatam actually is very poetic, by the way. I should have told a little bit earlier too that it's a nice poetry, very beautiful. I think, maybe I'm a little bit transgressing my limits to say because I'm not a scholar myself. So, but I do feel that it has a very good poetry, and whatever little knowledge I have about Vedanta scriptures or stories that I have read, I think Bhagavatam probably is the best book I have read because it keeps your attention gripping. It has a blend of everything. Basically, if you want to pick the devotional path or the path of knowledge, or whether you want to, whether you are moved by the formless aspect of God or God with form, or a personal or impersonal, and so on. It has a blend of everything. And actually blends it so well that it's kind of seamlessly moves on from one path or one attribute to another seamlessly. Anyway, that's my take. And as I said, with my limited knowledge of Vedanta scriptures, I felt it was probably the best book that can keep your attention for long. You can read quite a bit of content. And of course, there are benefits too. Okay, and going on. Now bursting into tears, Dhruva then approaches his mother, Suniti, who actually had heard this incident already from other people in the palace. And she also burst into tears. And then she kind of says these words to her son, Dhruva. Bear no ill will towards others. Whoever causes distress to others reaps the fruits of it afterwards in the shape of sufferings. What Suruchi said was right. Accept her advice and worship Lord Vishnu if you desire to be seated in the lap of your father. Install that being in your heart. Follow the religious practices with unswerving devotion and worship him who is fond of his servants. Again, I'll bring your attention back here to the words that she used, specifically saying, even in her, a general woman would have been very unhappy, angry, probably at Suruchi or king. But even here, she has the presence of mind and equanimity to say that what Suruchi said is right. Basically, follow her advice, worship Lord Vishnu, and gain his grace. So again, I felt it's remarkable that both the women, although in different states of emotion, but they were still speaking with some kind of sanity of mind or presence of, feeling the presence of God in their whatever they do, or at least they talk when they talk. And then she says, install that being in your heart, follow the religious practices with unswerving devotion, and worship him who is fond of his servants. So as contrast to those two women here presented in the story, even in their emotional state, they were thinking of God or praising God's grace and seeing that that's the ultimate reality or ultimate object to achieve in one's life. I would just draw attention to maybe myself and some of us probably who relate to that state of mind. How many of us in our state of sanity, so-called, and even equanimity, or even leave alone this kind of emotional state, how many of us really draw that kind of inspiration or attention to God as these two women are doing? So I felt that was a big contrast. Like even in that emotional state, they could think of God well, whereas some of us, or myself at least, I would say, doesn't think of that much, at least when we have not so much of a troubling emotions at hand. So moving on, the other important thing she said was don't hate your stepmom, so bear no ill will, which is again very sane advice. We know that we hear that very often in Vedanta too, especially in the Patanjali's Eightfold Path to Yoga, Ahimsa, which is like non-hatredness is said to be one of the yamas or practices to be followed. Now, I would like to bring attention to the Dhruva's desire, at least to some extent, that he wants to sit on the lap of his father. Now, this is seems to be like a bit trifling, and at least commonly seen amongst kids. Like, one sibling is being shown some affection, the other one wants to be shown the same thing too. So that's fairly common. But I kind of related to now what is our life in parallel to the Dhruva's desire. Like we also, I would say, at least some of us or many of us have some kind of, I would say some kind of desire, if you want to put that way, whatever it be, the object. Now, as a child, he is probably seeking attention of a father, but maybe as adults, probably we seek attention of some other person, maybe boss at work, maybe a wife or spouse, if you want to put that way, husband or wife, or a courting girlfriend or boyfriend, or a child, whoever it be. Sometimes I think even in the context of Vedanta society, even a Swami, if you want to put that way. So either way, we kind of try to seek some attention to ourselves too, or see that other people notice us or give some kind of attention and all that. So we are not very different in that sense compared to Dhruva. At least Dhruva is a child of 5 years, and I don't know what excuse we can give. So that's what I feel like. Maybe Dhruva is not that alien, at least to us. Now, even though Uttanapada is a king, so now I'm just analyzing the characters as of now, or in the context of whatever has happened till now. Now, Uttanapada is a king. He probably is, feared by most of the people in the kingdom, and everyone will respect him, revere him, and they will not probably go against his wishes and all that stuff, as a king normally is. But he is so afraid of his wife, Suruchi, that basically, at least, of course, Bhagavatam doesn't state that. Maybe he doesn't even see the injustice being done at that point to his other son, Dhruva. But even if he sees, I don't think he is acting on that. So he's probably afraid of Suruchi because he likes her so much, he doesn't want to offend her. So in a way, he's not sticking to, if you want to say, good conduct or truth or moral truth, relative truth in that sense, or moral values. In this context, actually, I would like to present one poem by Saint Tyagaraja. He wrote a poem in Telugu. It's basically sung by many Carnatic musicians. It's a fairly famous one. And also, of course, has a devotional attitude in that song. It basically begins with this line. This is only one line of the poem. It goes like this. I might put a tune to it, so pardon me if it doesn't sound great. Yenta nirchina, yenta juchina, yenta varalaina, kanta dasule, yenta nirchina. So those who are musicians can pardon me at least if the notes are not great, but the context is that, O Lord, those who do not always have the thought of the established path of the Lord, Vishnu, being one indweller, no matter how erudite and how much they have observed the world and howsoever high and mighty they may be, are indeed slaves of women. Of course, here literally the word women has come because of the word kanta, I mean, it's a context of being told to a man, I guess. But this is very appropriate for the king Uttanapada. He might be mighty, whatever, he might have conquered all the worlds, but he was still a slave to having a desire of it, that, towards a woman and all that. That's why actually when I first heard Swamiji being addressed as Maharaj, I was not exposed to that idea of Swamiji being called as a Maharaj until I came to Providence. I was first thinking, why is he being addressed as Maharaj? And then I was told later that because he has supposed to have conquered at least all the senses, sense perception, attachment to senses and all that. So he has conquered the enemies in that sense. That's why he's addressed as Maharaj. But the king may be entitled Maharaj, but Maharaj means, for the people who don't know, the Maharaj word means a great king. That's the literal translation. So the title of the king may be Maharaj, but he may be not really a Maharaj in that sense. He may be Maharaj only in a specific domain of administration or something. I'm sure many of us, or at least some of us, have faced that situation. Like you see some kind of injustice happening, you know it, but you don't act. And maybe the king is in that state of mind. Again, as I said, assuming that he has already acknowledged that there's an injustice happening. If he's totally unaware, of course, there's no kind of any thought process at least or introspection involved. But even then, even whatever the state of the king be, but we have faced such kind of situations ourselves, that so-and-so person who is very dear to us either talks or does things very bad to some other people, we don't speak against that person, or other way around is either the person is dear to us or that we are very dear to the person, other way around. Either way, it's the same relationship. In a way, someone who is kind of having some loving relationship between each other, we fail to act. And pretty much many of us have faced some kind of situation like that. Probably we don't want to offend that person and things like that. I kind of extended this a little bit to a bigger scale. Now, in modern times, at least, I just talked about a person, but we can extend it to other entities, abstract entities, if you want to put that way, more like a, political party, if I want to put that in an example. Many of us are very passionate about some political party. Okay, we subscribe to one, we really love that party, or if not love, at least we hate another party, so we kind of go with one party, so we don't have choice in that sense maybe. But either way, we are very passionate about some political party. And it's just a party or candidate. I'm just giving an example. You can think of anything, that's fine. So in a way, we are so attached to these entities that we really feel very passionate about it. At the end of the day, I personally feel what value does it add to us? I mean, in the value in the sense of a spiritual sense. Like, does it, okay, I know you people like to have a good administration and all that, but there's only certain level of support you can give, as I would say, devote your mind or heart to that extent. But there are people who really are very passionate and get riled up and all that kind of emotions come into them. And I actually am surprised and sorry also sometimes to say that we have people who are very serious spiritual practitioners and they also get riled up for this kind of issues like political issues or whatever. That I feel as a bit something disturbing, or I don't know, very. I may use the word hypocritical maybe, but I myself may be part of it. So, but anyway, I'm just saying that's something we need to ponder at least, I would say. Again, whenever we use the word attachment in Vedanta, we always think about human relationships or material objects like, say, home, car, job, whatever you want to put. But we don't think about some abstract entities like a political party, as I was saying, example, a religion maybe. Some people are very much moved by one particular religion, they subscribe to and they hate other religions maybe. Or country. Again, these are all artificial boundaries that we draw ourselves in our human scale, if you want to put it that way. And then we really get totally moved by them, totally buy into those things and get attached to them. So what I want to bring to attention is in the bigger scale where we have like millions of rebirths or whatever, if you take the rebirth theory as true, some people may not, but I'm just saying if you take it that as true, then we are actually just wasting our time in this birth on subscribing to some silly things, because next birth maybe will be an insect or a rock, who knows what. So this temporary existence, we are spending time and resources on something which are totally useless. So that's at least my take on having too much passions on it. I mean, I don't say that you don't support a party, whatever, but there's no reason to be totally passionate about it. Overlooking their own faults, in the sense, overlooking the faults of their own party, and always thinking the other party is evil, it's very silly, I feel. And especially in the media, that's very common, but it looks like it percolates into the society, and almost all people are affected by it, and they follow the same trend. So anyway, coming back to the point, the main thing is what we need to worry is how we reach God and how we reach the ultimate reality that we aspire for. That's the main goal. The other things that come in this life come and go anyway, so there's no point in really spending too much time. I would be passionate about it. Coming to Suruchi, she is like any person who has the backing of a very powerful person like a king. So she's totally bought into that arrogance and haughtiness. Again, that's a common thing many people see amongst us also, that if you have a backing of some authority or something, like if you're in an organization, your boss is always like, you're the favorite of the boss, then maybe you might have some feelings of superiority, you or I mean, I'm just using you as a general example. Don't think you as a personal you. Anyone can have that sense of superiority over others and show some kind of attitude and all that. So again, it's a common trend common attitude that people have in any situations like that. Now, going back to the story, Bhagavatam states that the Dhruva listens to his mother's advice. Now, again, it states in these particular words, it says, although given in grief-stricken prattle. Now, again, that's interesting because the Bhagavatam could have just said, listens to his mother's advice, but it also used this phrase saying, although given in grief-stricken prattle. So here is a hint, at least that's what I think, is that those who speak in emotional state of mind, disturbed and all that, they may speak of course, some sensible things, but most of the times may not. So it's incumbent on us to ignore those words. And if you are in that situation and you are facing the ire of the person, maybe diffuse it if you can, or just bear through it, because the other person may eventually calm down and things may work out okay. If you react, of course, you're just going to aggravate it further and making it worse. Personally, I would say actually just this week, or in fact, it started last week, we had some customer. I work in a company which deals with with a customer review for engineering services. So we had a customer who was totally riled up and angry, and he wrote like emails which were a little bit nasty and all that. We didn't respond. We means me and my manager. We both didn't respond to that. We kind of kept it quiet for a day or two, and then he came around and actually apologized profusely, rather, and everything went off well. Okay, so that was a good thing we did. Of course, we might not have done with any high moral virtue. Maybe we did that because we want to keep the customer relationship active. But what I mean is things can work that way. All right. Okay, I think I need to switch gears because I see the time too, and looks like we may not. At least I need to cover. I may not be able to cover the whole topic of or the whole story, so I'll cover at least to a certain extent, and maybe that should be it for this session. So Dhruva, a 5-year-old boy, now leaves home. So after this, whatever the mother has advised, he actually leaves home. Now imagine a 5-year-old boy leaving home in quest for acquiring the grace of God. This is again not a normal situation that you see or hear. Many people or many children bear through this. You can say domestic abuse if you want to put it that way. But of course they try to escape too maybe, but this is more of a different kind, right? You're actually seeking the grace of God in that sense. It's a little bit of a different scenario. So he is going for God's grace. Again, maybe there's an ulterior motive, which we will talk about eventually. But he is going for God's grace in the faith and in the understanding that is the ultimate reality or ultimate object to achieve in one's life. So it's not just like he's going to grace. I mean, he's going to get the God's grace, but also he has some other desires to achieve, which is true partially. But his main focus was still to gain the grace of God. That was his kind of a only focus, at least up to that point. I actually have a personal anecdote on trying to understand Dhruva's state of mind. He is angry, he's somewhat angry, I would say, on his stepmom, and also he wants to achieve the grace of God to attain something, better conditions in his life than what the current circumstances give him. So in the personal anecdote, what I have, again, I see that the time I don't have much, but I will skip that. Maybe if I have the time, I will probably bring it back again. I just thought that will be some kind of an interesting episode that I could share at least. But I will skip that for now. Maybe if I have time at the end, I will just try to see what I could relate to as Dhruva's state of mind from my own experience. So maybe I'm not even scrolling the slides. Let's see. Okay, that's probably the right one. So at this point, now he has gone to the forest. Now sage Narada comes to Dhruva to help Dhruva. This is again an interesting thing. He has just gone to the forest and seeking God's grace, but from nowhere, or at least you can say, sage Narada has come to help him. Now again, a great sage like Narada coming to help is of course a very beneficial and a remarkable thing. It is said that when one is yearning to achieve something, it will come to fruition. Now, this is generally the idea that if you yearn for something very passionately or very strongly in a sense of you want it, you will get it. Again, it could be an object of anything. It could be a material object. As in this case, it is actually grace of God. Things will happen in such a way that the circumstances and conditions will favor or facilitate rather you to get that object. So it is actually said that don't desire even material objects very intensely because it may come to fruition, and that actually adds to your bondage in a way. So that's why they say don't desire even material objects intensely. Of course, on the flip side, if they don't come to fruition, then it's very disappointing and disheartening and depressing probably. So anyway, either way, it's a danger. Either if they come to fruition or whether not come to fruition. So that's why it said don't desire any material objects passionately. But now the same thing what I was saying, the circumstances and conditions or universe, if you want to put that way, the external conditions to you kind of connive or conjure up something that will help you to achieve the goal if you are intensely desiring something. So in that same sense, Swami Vivekananda says, this is again in the context of spirituality, it's a mysterious law of nature that as soon as the field is ready, the seed must and does come. As soon as the soul earnestly desires to have religion, the transmitter of the religious force must and does appear to help that soul. When the power that attracts the light of religion in the receiving soul is full and strong, the power which answers to that attraction and sends in light does come as a matter of course. This is actually excerpt from a Need of a Guru in Bhakti Yoga by Swami Vivekananda. We have actually seen this kind of as an illustration in Sri Ramakrishna's life himself. Whenever he had quest for following, say, a certain path, like Vaishnava path or a Tantric path or a Advaita path, teachers have come on their own and taught him, or guided him at least, how to do the practices. So if someone has that strong yearning to achieve something, it will come to fruition, or at least there will be some conditions that will happen which will favor for those things to come to fruition. And Sri Ramakrishna himself said, if you take one step towards God, he or she takes about 10 steps towards you. So that's saying that God himself or herself is very eager to meet the devotees or grant devotees' wishes. Again, here wishes in the sense of spiritual goal, if you want to put that way. But sometimes if it's a materialistic sense, maybe even that will come to fruition. It depends on how intensely you desire for those and also through as God's grace. So now the first thing what he does is he tests the student, just like any teacher does. So what he says is this: one may have the sense of being honored and dishonored, but the feeling of happiness and unhappiness associated with these are only due to infatuations caused by ignorance. For happiness and unhappiness in life are due to karma of the past. O wise one, a wise man who has faith in divine dispensation should feel satisfied with whatever happens, as this is Lord's will. The Supreme Lord, whom your mother has advised to worship, is difficult to attain even by great sages, devoid of worldly attachments, and constantly practice samadhi. Therefore, abstain from this resolution, as it will be futile. You can do all that after you reach proper age to perform such holy deeds. Now, he's a 5-year-old, so he's being advised, maybe if you grow up, And this is a common advice commonly many people give to a child or even young people. If they are very much interested in, say, religion or spirituality, they are told this is not the time to follow these things. You can do it later in life. And besides that, even Narada philosophically also puts a very strong, convincing point in a way, saying that it's a divine dispensation that you have undergone, so you kind of accept it and take it as God's will. And so don't worry and just go back and be satisfied with what you have and think that it's actually the karma of the past. Now, normally this would go well with some people maybe, but for Dhruva, his answer will come later on. It of course, it doesn't go well because his state of mind is not prepared to accept that kind of an argument. This is something similar to where you can say Krishna and Arjuna's conversation happens in the beginning, where Arjuna tries to be very philosophical and tries to escape the war, but at the same time, he was not mentally prepared to do that. So in that context, you can say this is something similar. Narada is advising something which Dhruva was not able to accept at that point. I'd like to draw some parallels to two other kids that we normally hear in Vedanta lectures, at least here, is Prahlad and Nachiketa. Now, they also have been tested by Lord. They also were granted some boons, and they could have taken some other path, like I was saying, path to happiness, so-called, at least sensual pleasures, if you want to put it that way, rather than path to knowledge. But both of them deny that. And these are the responses they give when they were given those kind of tests. So Prahlada, I probably will not read the whole thing because again we're running out of time. So I'll just say, O Lord, thou must have offered to me these temptations of desirable enjoyments which form the seed of samsara and the knot of the heart in order to show to the world the characteristic of a real devotee. O Lord, O the greatest of boon givers, if thou art very particular about giving a boon, fulfilling any desire of mine, deign to grant the boon that no desire for any boon shall rise in my mind. So he's basically saying desirelessness. I don't want any desire except for devotion to you. And Nachiketa, I will not read the whole thing. So Nachiketa, the context was he was given a boon where he could have asked anything like, wealth, progeny, long life. They also put beautiful women in that sense in the context of Guy, I guess, but in the Upanishad it comes there, and all that stuff. But he refuses all that. He says these pleasures are temporary. I don't need all that. I want to learn. I want to understand the knowledge of self and practice that. So that's the gist of what the Nachiketa said when he was given the boon for asking anything he wants. So in the same way, Dhruva also declines it. But his declination is something a bit different. It's not exactly like in the context of Nachiketa and Prahlada, what we have seen earlier. What he says is that path of peace, which is difficult for persons like us to understand, is what now you declared for the people who are swayed by the pairs of opposites like happiness and misery. But this advice does not make an impression on my mind, which has a royal character of pride and resistance to injury. In this instance, generated by the arrows of abuse inflicted on my heart by my stepmom Suruchi. O great one, show me the way to attain to a state for superior to all in the three worlds, and which even my grandfather could not attain. So he has now I would say, raised the stakes in a way. It's not just that he wanted attention of his father or love his father. He actually has much more than that now. So one thing what we understand from this is Dhruva is a very determined person. He's not swayed by anything that's being offered. So in a sense, he's very focused of what he wants to get. And the second thing is the desire, which was, as I said, is a simple one to begin with, became grander. And now it's like he wants to become the greatest in his lineage and so on. So I thought it's like a kind of an analogy is a kid, if you deny a chocolate or candy, maybe next time actually thinks that I want a whole box or something. Or maybe in the context of Dhruva, it could be a whole store or a granary or a warehouse of chocolates, maybe, whatever. Anyway, so his desire has grown also over a period of time. But Narada then proceeds to initiate him into a spiritual practice. His quote is this: the worship of the Lord Srihari is the one common means for the attainment of any of the four aspects of human welfare. Now again, here the dharma, which means path of righteousness, artha is prosperity in the world, kama means sensory pleasures that come to fruition, and moksha, which is liberation from samsara, which is like the cycle of birth and death. So again, as I said, the, people come to God for various reasons. Now, even Sri Krishna said in Gita that there are 4 categories of devotees: one who craves for wealth, one who want to get rid of afflictions, one who is curious to know God, and other one is actually the illumined soul. So all of these are devotees according to Sri Krishna. Now, Dhruva definitely falls in one of these categories. He's probably trying to get rid of the affliction of that abuse that his stepmom inflicted on him, and also maybe he wants to have a better life and all that. He's probably not at the state where he wants really like a moksha and all that. So at this point, we may think like, oh, Dhruva seems to be like a very ordinary person. But is it so? Yeah, he may be ordinary in the context of, say, if you consider Sri Ramakrishna or a Gautam Buddha or some great illumined souls that way. Yeah, maybe ordinary. But is he ordinary from a perspective of a normal person? Not really, because I feel he still thinks the God's grace and God is a real entity that can grant his wishes, which is a very, I would say, a high step, at least in spiritual progress. Because to think that God is a real entity, is existing, and he will grant the boons of devotees, to find the realism of God always, it's not a trivial thing, at least. For many people, it's kind of lifetimes of practice maybe, and so on, to come to that state. So in that sense, it's not very ordinary. It's definitely exceptional and maybe inspirational from his practices and what he undergoes and all that. So Narada continues further and he gives more instructions. Now I kind of put them into kind of a 5 categories. Of course, people can be free to interpret the way they want. So what I saw was that the instructions were given as a 5 purificatory rites, if you want to put that way. So one is the purification of the body. Again, I won't read the whole details, but what he says is take some bath, then honor the deities daily and adopt a proper seat. This is basically a meditation practice. He's teaching them how to meditate. So he's giving him all the basics of meditation. Control the breath, and gradually you will purify your senses and mind and so on. So one should meditate on the Lord that way. The next one is purification of sight. Here he describes the Lord's form in great detail. Again, in Srimad Bhagavatam, you come across Lord's form, as shown in the picture there. That's one of the representations. In great detail. Everything will be detailedly described, like the lotus he's holding, the conch, the discus, the mace, and his general attire with all the ornaments and everything. So that's kind of a complete description by itself, and people who want to meditate on that form, it's very helpful for them. So he describes that form in great detail, and then he proceeds to initiate him into a mantra. That mantra is Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, which means salutations to God Vasudeva. Again, Vasudeva literally could be son of Vasudeva, which means Krishna, or in this context, it actually could be even Vishnu. They kind of use it interchangeably. And then the next one is the purification of thought. Here, one should meditate on the. Actually, I think the sequence is wrong. He actually describes wrong in the sense I put it wrong in the slide. Purification of action comes earlier. So what he describes is actually the worship of the Lord with various articles. And then he adds the quote saying the worshipper must be contemplative, peaceful, given to speaking only on divine topics, and living on a spare diet of pure substances. So he's trying to control your intake and other things of your life, like in habits, and then have meditate on the Lord and also worship him. The next one is purification of thought. Now this is a detailed kind of preparation for meditating on the Lord in the heart, and then he describes how one can get over the obstacles in that path. So basically that's given. All the instructions are given to Dhruva, and then Dhruva circumambulates the sage Narada. So he's a teacher for him, and then he salutes him, and then he leaves to Madhuvana, which is a forest on the banks of river Yamuna. There he goes to practice meditation. Meanwhile, Uttanapada, the father, is in great remorse for his actions. He realizes what he has done, and he, I will skip the details, but he kind of feels very remorseful and apologetic and all that stuff. So he's dejected that his actions have led to this state where Dhruva had to leave the home. Again, imagine he's a 5-year-old kid leaving the kingdom and going into our palace and going into a forest. But Narada consoles him, and what he says is this: grieve not, O king. The boy is protected by the Lord, as his very son. Again, that's a strong assurance. If someone says God is taking care of him as a son, that means, of course, there's no harm going to come to that person. Again, in the context of Bhagavad Gita also, again, we come across this verse. There are those who always think of me and engage in exclusive devotion to me. To them, whose minds are always absorbed in me, I provide what they lack and preserve what they already possess. So this is a very strong assurance by God. This like you can say something like an insurance in our modern context, which even insurance companies cannot provide that way. So in that sense, this is very important. I actually put a quote from Jesus Christ in the same scenario where he gives that kind of assurance in the Sermon on the Mount, which we have read earlier here during Christmas Eve. So I'll not read through the whole details, but you get the context of it. Actually, at this point, I wanted to mention a little bit of some of us probably will try hard to, would like to at least, or try hard if not, would like to do that to grow spiritually and, mature ourselves and reach the goal maybe sooner than what we are probably, what's the natural course of things would do. But there's always this doubt that comes in us, like, oh, if I do this, or if I, take this decision or scenario, would it help me, or would it affect me negatively? What will happen to me or other people who are dependent, or whom I love, or who are dependent on me, and so on. There is that tinge of that doubtfulness always comes in us, and we have great examples. Again, Saint Tukaram in Maharashtra. Again, he kind of ignored his family to a great extent in the worldly sense, if you want to put it that way, but he was so devoted to God. So the family was kind of secondary. And again, we see even in Sri Ramakrishna's life, not in his own life, but I meant as the devotees associated with his life. There are a great number of examples, like Nag Mahasaya and so on, who had to sacrifice. Again, sacrifice is a point of view from a worldly person, but from his person, probably it's not even a sacrifice because it's so natural. It's kind of a trifling. In that context, I say that many of us are some kind of a comfort zone. Either it could be a human relationships, as I was saying, an example like a family, or it could be even a job, or it could be a house or a car. I'm just giving you some material objects, but anyway, some kind of artificial props that we ourselves establish, or a bank balance, if you want to put it that way, that may be more tangible. All those are like our artificial props that we have created ourselves and feel that they are the ones that will take care of us eventually, or at least they are needed to us. Maybe we should do some kind of thought experiment and think like, what if they are not there? How will our life be? Would it be better in the sense of spirituality or worse? Again, if you are totally relying on God, in the worldly sense, yes, you may be appearing suffering. I know people say, oh yeah, that person, he or she chose this path and now see what happens to this person. But in that worldly sense, but in the spiritual sense, really that doesn't matter. As I was saying earlier, again, millions of rebirths or whatever we have, whatever small things we do here and there shouldn't matter. And if it's something for the greater good, that is like the ultimate goal of us, why not do it? So that's something which should inspire us. Again, I have some context here for, it's actually from a movie. I don't want to describe in great detail, but those who know the movie probably will understand it. So I'll just describe in one line or something. It's basically the movie from Batman. It's a Batman movie. In that there are some bunch of prisoners that are sitting in they're imprisoned underground. There's a vertical well that goes up. So the only way to escape is, of course, climb the walls of the well, and which is not easy. It's very rough and so on. But there's also a rope in between attached from halfway through the well, where someone can tie on the waist and go up. So even if they kind of fall, they are suspended, they won't die. So many people try to do that. And at some place in between, there is two slabs. Like, you have to jump from one slab to the other slab and then go up further. So many people they go up to this slab, they try to jump, and even if they can't really reach this slab, they fall. But they get suspended, so they don't die in that sense, they come down. So in this movie, the protagonist does that attempt to, and he fails. But then an elderly person, or actually prisoner, tells him that, the fear is what is preventing you to escape, which is what the dialogue was, at least in the movie. Which is true in many of our cases too. It's the fear, right? We are afraid of something, and afraid of unknown, or whatever you want to put that way, or afraid of losing things which we think are supporting us, which actually not true. So either way, there is some fear in us that needs to be overcome. Now this prisoner, what he does is, taking that advice, he actually doesn't take any rope around his waist. So basically he climbs free on the walls. So anything happens, it's going to be a death. He reaches the first slab, and then he makes a very good attempt and jumps and then escapes. The point is, actually the rope that he was tying across was preventing him from taking that extra step or extra push, or the motivation, if you want to put that way. And the rope that was actually, we think is safety, or at least that's what the people who were trying to escape thought, was the bondage at that point, because that was what preventing people to really escape. So that false sense of notion that we have, at least for some of these props that we create ourselves, is something that we need to at least introspect, I would say, in our own way, in each one's life. Okay, I think I'll move to the story now. So Dhruva did great penances and austerities. Actually, Bhagavatam describes it in great detail. He ate fruits once in 3 days for the first month, grass and dry leaves only once in 6 days next month, and the third month he had water only once in 9 days, and fourth month he took air only once in 12 days. And then the fifth month he didn't even breathe well, I guess, no breathing either, constantly in samadhi, standing on one leg as a post. Now, this is a great description, of course, of the person who is doing a lot of austerities, and we may think it's humanly not possible, whatever be the case, but the idea is he was totally focused and dedicated in the practice. That's the basic take-home message, if you want to put that way. And he gained control over body and mind through these austerities. Again, austerities themselves are not so useful, but you can always kill your body that way if you want to, but the idea is use those austerities to gain some control over the body and mind so that they help you in meditation and other activities, spiritual activities, if you want to put that way. So that's why it may be a graded approach for many of them. It may not be as fast as or dramatic as has been described for Dhruva, but each one of us can do some kind of austerities in our capacity, at least, to gain control over body and mind. In modern times, we hear Sri Ramana Maharshi also undertook so much austerity, or like he was immersed in so much of meditation. Actually, again, austerity is a very external, superficial word imposed by other people. For them, probably they're so immersed in meditation, it doesn't even matter. The food and everything had to be artificially put through his mouth, and so on. So just to keep his body survive, or maintain his body survive. Sri Ramakrishna also, we have some examples that way. So anyway, these austerities, they may begin consciously as efforts, but later on they become natural, and the focus of meditation takes over so much that people's or the basic needs that are required to be met may not even be required for those people. Okay, and then the Bhagavatam goes on to state that withdrawing the mind, the source of all sense and sense perceptions, into buddhi, Dhruva perceived nothing but the Lord's form, which he was meditating upon. So at this point, his intense meditation trembled all the worlds, and so the demigods, usually that's the kind of thing happens in most of these scenarios. They feel afraid, like, someone is doing such a great austerity, they might overtake us, or they might devoid us of our positions and power and so on. That's the kind of thing happens in Hinduism. It is the description of demigods. They're jealous, usually, of people who do a lot of penances. So even in the case, if you recall, there's a story of Vishwamitra who was doing a lot of penance to achieve some materialistic objective in a way. Then these devas, or the demigods, they conspired and sent a beautiful damsel called Menaka, and he got drifted by that. So anyway, the story goes that way. That's the Vishwamitra and Menaka story. So the idea is, whoever is trying to achieve something lofty in this material sense of world, the demigods become jealous and probably afraid. So they go approach Mahavishnu now, like the ultimate reality of the Godhead, and plead him to give a darshan, or the vision, to this boy, so that he doesn't do so many penances and upset their positions in some sense. So when Lord Vishnu appeared before Dhruva, he was in the form exactly as being meditated by him. Again, this is a very common thing that we hear. Whatever the devotee, Ishta, as you may say, the deity that you meditate upon, you focus on, the form, everything. That form usually is what the God takes to as giving you as a vision. And again, we hear such cases even in devotees and monks, monk disciples of the life of Sri Ramakrishna too, that Sri Ramakrishna appeared to them and had some conversation or guided them in their spiritual path. There's also one story that goes by where Hanuman visited Dwarka, where Krishna lives. Hanuman is devoted to Rama and Sita, which is like a prior incarnation. But when he comes, Krishna and Rukmini, they think, oh, no, we have to now dress up as Rama and Sita because that's what Hanuman is devoted to. So they want to grant him that darshan or vision because that was a devotee's temperament or the form that he aspired to see. So Dhruva then prostrated at Lord's Vishnu feet, but now this is a 5-year-old boy, so you can imagine he doesn't have much vocabulary or words to compose or sing a great prayer or poem. So what Lord does is he touches his conch. There's a conch there on one of his hands there, and on his cheek. And that conch is said to be like a symbolic representation, like it's like a encompassing of all the Vedic knowledge and everything. So the boy Dhruva now becomes a poet, and he composes a great poem called Dhruva Stuti, which are basically 12 verses. I thought we can play something from the YouTube, just few verses maybe. And for those who are watching online, it won't be there because we have copyright issues. We cannot show YouTube videos on the web. So maybe they can come back in a minute or two, but the link will be provided in the chat, I guess. So I think Jitendra will help us to show us the video now. It's basically video, but it's actually it's a slideshow. So it comes as two of them, which were not probably covered in this, the short one that we just went through. I thought they were a little bit, they can stand out somewhat. They indeed are lost souls who approach thee, a veritable wish-yielding tree. I think we need to come back to slide, sorry. That can bestow even liberation from repeated cycle of birth and death. Yeah. Sorry, that's the one, yes. So for the mean sensual satisfactions of this cadaverous body, satisfactions which can be had even in an animal body, O Lord, to a devotee of thine who is desireless and ever engaged in worship of thee, who art the very embodiment of man's highest aspiration. Their feet are, your feet, I think, are the sole object of quest. He seeks no other boons. Yet, O Lord, thou who art ever bent on bestowing thy grace on all, dost protect the weak and suffering even as a cow protects its own calf. Now, I just need to pay a little bit of attention. So this is what Dhruva said, but we need to pay attention to the last sentence. So what he says is, people really are desireless when they try to achieve you, or that's you're thinking that your God, your grace and your presence is what to be aspired for. But at the same time, he used the word yet. If you pay attention to the last, the third line from below, you see there's the word yet. Yet, O Lord, thou who art ever bent on bestowing thy grace on all, does protect the weak and suffering, even as a cow protects its own calf. So what he's kind of imploring here in a subtle way is, you need to give me that grace, but because I'm kind of weak and suffering in the sense of context of what he underwent. So That's kind of a implied meaning here. It's not obvious and explicit. So it's not just the desirelessness he's trying to say, but it's also that you are a bounty of desire fulfilling God, so you need to do that for me, in a way, indirect way of implication. So Lord Vishnu is pleased with his devotee for this 12 verses, that Dhruva Stuti, which is actually sung fairly common by some devotees, at least that we hear. Lord Vishnu is pleased with his devotee Dhruva, and then he says this: I understand what you have in your mind. I shall grant it to you, even though normally it is inaccessible. There is an eternal luminary known as Dhruva. This is a Dhruva, not the name of the person, but a sphere, like you can say some kind of a region, among the heavenly bodies, which no one has attained till now. All the planets, stars, and galaxies are centered on it. After you succeed to your father's throne, due to his retirement to forest, you will rule over the earth with uninterrupted vigor for 36,000 years. Your brother Uttama will meet with his death while hunting, and his mother Suruchi, while going about forest in great anxiety in search of her son, will be consumed in a forest fire. In the end, you will attain complete disenchantment with the life of the world and become again devoted to me. Afterwards, you will attain to that realm of mine described earlier, attaining which a person does not return to earth. So this is what the Lord gives him as a blessing. We'll talk about this little bit more, but moving on, because we ran out of time already. So I'll just say, so now Maitreya says to Vidura, remember the context I was saying, Vidura and Maitreya sage were actually conversing, and there the description of this story comes in. So now Maitreya is saying to Vidura, the Lord disappears from there. As the boy looks on, it's not in the slide, sorry, I'm just reading. And having obtained Mahavishnu's grace, the fulfillment of all desires, he went back to his city with an uneasy mind. Now, who went back to city? This is Dhruva. Dhruva went back to city with an uneasy mind. So it's a bit curious, right? I mean, you saw Lord, your desires got fulfilled in a way, I mean, whatever Lord has granted, and you must be feeling at least satisfied to some extent, but no, he was a bit uneasy. So Vidura asked the same question. Why was he uneasy? What was the reason? So to which the Maitreya replies, and this is the one his reply is, remembering the wordy shafts of his stepmother that had pierced his heart, he could not even think of mukti, which is the liberation from repeated cycles of birth and death. It was this thought that made him uneasy in the mind. Dhruva thinks, alas, in a short period of 6 months, I attained to a state of near proximity to the Lord, for which sages like Sanandana practice continence and samadhi for repeated lives, and yet the fool that I am, I have abandoned it owing to my worldly ambitions. Shame, shame unto me, an ill-starred fellow. See how my hankering after material fulfillments has influenced me to prefer those short-lived felicities, even after attaining to the feet of the Lord, which cut asunder worldly bonds. Influenced by his yoga maya, I was like one in dream state and was overcome by false sense of separateness. I have even considered my brother as enemy. Vain is this worldly advantage that I have sought, just like the treatment given to a dead man. After propitiating the Lord, sorry, I think I have a typo here, whose grace is so difficult to achieve, I have, alas, sought of him who is destroyer of samsara, my continuance in it. So he's saying, instead of seeking liberation, I'm seeking continuation in this pair of opposites, or the world of pair of opposites. Owing to my stupidity and misfortune, I have sought of the Lord, granter of eternal bliss, the fulfillment of worldly ambitions, just like a beggar who goes to an emperor and begs for chaff. So this is the remorse he had. So Dhruva has attained his so-called materialistic objective desires and all that, but he still was a bit unsatisfied and with a kind of a regret that he didn't ask for what was supposed to be asked after all that effort he had put in. So we hear again in the context of Sri Ramakrishna, Mathur Babu, like Swamiji was describing, I think last class maybe, that even though he served Sri Ramakrishna so well with all the sincerity and devotion, but still he had some desires in him, and so maybe he was born as a king elsewhere after his death. So first, what can we infer from Dhruva's thoughts at this point? First is Dhruva has thought of harm of his brother, because he admitted that himself in this thought, that he had thought of a harm to his brother. And maybe that's why, if we go back to the Lord saying, what he said was, your brother will die in a forest, and also your stepmom will die in a great fire or forest fire. So it may not have been expressed as, but the Lord already said in the beginning that I know what you're thinking. So basically his thoughts are obviously known to the Lord. So, and then he has mentioned this specifically. So that means Dhruva had actually thought that his stepmom, and his brother should have some kind of physical injury or whatever, maybe anger, out of anger. And those have come to fruition by Lord's will, of course, because of Dhruva's desires. So again, that regret is there, that I had thought so negatively about other people or his own family in a way. And then, of course, he also regrets that he frittered away golden chance of attaining the highest goal. Now, what Lord has granted to him was he will go to a divine state, or called Dhruva, the luminary or the heavenly body, where he will have no return to earth once he goes there. But only after he has done, like he has enjoyed, so-called, in this worldly pleasures for certain time, rule the king, and then get disenchantment, and then move to the luminary, where he will be always remembering God. So which is the highest state, of course. You're always remembering God there, and you're in devotion, complete devotion, you see God everywhere in that realm. But until then, he still had the craving to enjoy this worldly pleasures, and so he had to undergo that, which is what his regret was, that I still had sought these things, even though my goal was supposedly or should be highest. Okay, I think we'll conclude from here. Basically, now he returns home, he gets a rousing welcome. Again, in Bhagavatam, that's the beauty of it. As I said, its poetry is like maybe unparalleled, at least in my opinion. There's a great description of anything that goes, either you call it so-called worldly or spiritual, or any, form of a divine being, like Vishnu, what was described. It will be exquisite and all nice detail and poetry. Then you will have something very maybe mundane, like celebration, as I was saying. Someone is coming in and he'll describe the town was, or Bhagavatam may describe the town is greatly decorated and all this, with a little bit of a so-called exaggeration, if you want to put that way. But anyway, that whole thing is always kind of heightened or exaggerated to some extent. But the point is to always dwell in that realm of Lord and his activities and excellences. That's the main goal of Bhagavatam. So even the description may be somewhat extraordinary and out of the world, so to speak, but the underlying current always they describe is this is all happening because of Lord's grace. So that kind of statement is always comes as a reminder once in a while, whenever, even if they describe something so-called mundane in great detail. So with that, I think I could conclude. So in conclusions, I have like 4 points, like a take-home message, if you want to put that way. First thing is no substitute to hard work, which is what Dhruva did with severe penances. Except that he's probably the gradient, if you want to put that way in a mathematical sense. 6 months was enough for him to achieve God's grace. For many of us, maybe it's lifetimes, who knows what. So, but anyway, for his determination and the way he did, he could achieve that very quickly. Love for Lord is, of course, the main thing. I mean, you can do a lot of spiritual practices but if there's no internal component, that is the love for God, that doesn't come out. So it comes out in Dhruva as a sincerity in seeking Lord's grace, and he underwent severe penances and austerities for that. The third one is faith in Guru's instructions. Now, Narada instructed him to follow some certain rites and path and everything, and he followed that to the letter and spirit in a way. And he never doubted the efficacy. I mean, you can imagine he underwent so much of severe austerities and all that. Maybe at some point, if he could have thought, like, you know what, this is not working, maybe I should change, or maybe I should just go back home or talk to someone else and get something else or something, whatever. But those thoughts at least didn't come in his mind, at least as described in the text, and he just persevered. So having that faith in Guru's words and taking it to the full extent is what is needed. And the last one is, of course, desires are obstacles. So even though he had a vision of God, he still had some desires. So that's a little bit odd. I mean, there are other examples too. We hear like Ravanasur, like the demon Ravan, had a vision of God, but he also had some desires of worldly sense. So anyway, what I mean is vision of God is not the ultimate thing. You can have that. You can serve God in human form, like an incarnation, say Sri Ram Krishna or Krishna and Rama but it doesn't change your attitude, or it doesn't make you more devotional or spiritual in that sense. So the ideal thing would have been, of course, to have no desires, and which is what one should strive for. With that, I think I'll conclude. Thank you for your patience to listen to me and also your holy company. Do we do questions first? I guess, right? Questions first. And the peace chant later. All right. If you have any questions, I'm looking at Charlie straight because usually he's the one.
Well, what happened to the king and Dhruva's mother?
Oh, King Dhruva. Dhruva's father, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, so that happens, whatever the Lord said. So Dhruva's father, of course, they are happy that the son came back. And then the father hands over the kingdom to Dhruva.
Right.
And he goes to forest, which is what I was
And how
said.
about the mother?
Mother, actually, good you brought that. I didn't have time to cover that topic. So mother, of course, she was alive and all that. I mean, she was with the son probably for a while. So when the son, Dhruva, after he felt that disenchantment with life and he wanted to go back to that, go to the sphere of the realm of Dhruva. Actually, by the way, the Dhruva is a pole star they call, in at least from the Western context, if you want to put it, around which everything rotates. So he wanted to go to that sphere because now he thought I'm done with this life. But he also felt inclination that his mother also should come to that sphere. And actually the story says that his mother also accompanied him to that divine sphere.
His mother what?
His mother also accompanied him to that divine sphere. So she went with him. Actually, that was, I was thinking, interesting. Many of these great luminaries we hear about, like Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Shankaracharya, all those people had reverence and love for their own mother in one sense. I mean, bodily mother, if you want to put it that way. But they took great attention and pains in one sense to see that they also were taken care of in one sense, like a spiritual way, if you want to put that way. Any more questions? I don't know if there is anything on the web, but I may not answer. All right, I think. I don't think we have time for that. 8:41. Maybe I can share with you if I'm there somewhere, if someone wants to listen, but I think officially we don't have time. I'm already crossed, and Swamiji probably will kill me for that. Sorry. He told not to go beyond time. Okay, so let's chant. I won't like to chant this because that was a mantra that was given to Dhruva for meditation by Narada. So if you want to join, you can join. I'll chant 3 times that mantra. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Salutations to Lord Vasudeva, or Krishna or Vishnu. Thank you. It's 42, already 12 minutes past.